to order after our quick recess. The next presentations, we will be discussing municipality incorporation for the Poinciana community. We're going to have a 20-minute presentation from both sides and public testimony following the presentation. I'd like to remind everybody to please silence any cell phones and take any conversations out to the lobby. On to the presentations. Our gentlemen are already ready for us. First up, Mr. Keith Latham and Val Ramos from the Poinciana Corporation, now Citizens Home Organization, a.k.a. PINCHOS 2014. Gentlemen, all yours.
Okay, thank you very much. My name is Keith Latham. Val Ramos, who's the head of the PINCHOS organization, will be presenting most of the presentation. I'd like to start this out with a video clip, if I may. Let's hope the technology works. Eyewitness News reporter Denise Broom found out why they still think it's crucial for the area to have its own government.
Since 1971, Poinciana has been growing. Shopping centers, homes, and even a hospital set to open this year. The area is part of both Osceola and Polk counties and is unincorporated. That means it isn't a municipality with its own government. But some residents think it's time for a change.
As a municipal government, like a village or a city or whatever, Poinciana would be holding elections where all of the citizens of Poinciana would be able to vote.
If Poinciana became a city, it would have a population of close to 50,000 people. That's about the size of Titusville, and it would be bigger than St. Cloud. Right now, Poinciana's 9 villages are run by homeowners associations. The Association of Poinciana Villages governs those boards. Poinciana's funding comes from Osceola and Polk County governments, and money collected by the homeowners associations covers other things. But Keith Latham says residents are missing out on money they're already paying in gas, sales, and utility taxes.
Those taxes are made available to city governments so that they can be spent locally. They're not available to homeowners associations.
The group would still look to the counties for emergency services and law enforcement. Latham says they just want the chance to vote in their leadership and have more control over where their money goes.
We get some of it back from the counties, but not all of it.
In Poinciana, Denise Broom, Channel 9, Eyewitness News.
The group pushing for the change is hosting a meeting with the Florida League of Cities so residents can ask questions about what this would mean for them if Poinciana does in fact become a city.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, delegate members. My name is Valentin Ramos. I am a 22-year licensed community association manager, as well as a resident of Poinciana and owner of a home for 24 years. Our purpose being here is basically to establish an effort to make Poinciana a municipality with a base of services that compares to that provided by the APV HOA today. Once established, additional services may be decided on by the voters or their elected representatives. We took some of the census numbers, which show in 2010 there were 47,000 residents. Of those 47,000 residents, 26,000 plus are registered voters. There is a taxable property base of $799,061,799. The map is not moving. We have a map that is probably in your package. The map is shown as a sample only. The actual legal maps, including meets and bounds, are on file with Polk and Osceola counties under legal definitions of Osceola villages 1, 2, and 5, as well as Polk villages 3, 7, and 8. Poinciana's initial revenue calculations using the following: share, sales tax, municipal revenue sharing, utility tax, and property tax totals approximately $11.1 million. The Poinciana proposed budget between administration, parks and recreation, community service, public works, and the restricted building account comes up to $7.2 million, which means that there would be a surplus if we were a municipality of almost $4 million. Poinciana services to be continued from counties will be the sheriff, fire, EMS, planning, zoning, code enforcement, library, parks and recreation, garbage and waste, road maintenance, and utilities from existing providers. One of the biggest questions that everybody has is what happens to the APV HOA? Well, Florida Constitution, Article 8, Section 2B, powers, municipalities shall have governmental, corporate, and proprietary powers to enable them to conduct municipal government, perform municipal functions, and render municipal services, and may exercise any power for municipal purposes except as otherwise provided by law. Each municipal legislative body shall be elective. The city of Poinciana would have the proprietary rights under Florida Constitution to render municipal functions and municipal services currently provided by the APV HOA today. And those are Parks and Recreation, Community Service, Public Works, and the administration of those services. How much will this cost Poinciana residents? Well, if the 3 mil proposed property tax is passed, the average taxable value home in Poinciana is $40,000, which means that the average Poinciana homeowner would pay $120 in year taxes versus the $252 that they pay to the HOA. And there's an example of a resident that resides in Poinciana who's actually paying $252 to the APV with an assessed taxable value of $7,092. That would pay $21.27 based on the 3% millage rate, which is a savings of $230. There was a rebuttal that was filed by this group, Colby, and we have tried to answer that rebuttal. I think all of you will have a copy, but if you don't, we have copies here. And we are willing to answer any questions that you may have.
Members, any questions?
Well, I do. I want to, the average assessed value is $40,000.
The average taxable value, sir.
I'm sorry, say it again.
The average taxable value in Poinciana is $40,000.
So is that after?
I'm sorry, assessed value before the deductions.
Before homestead exemption?
Yes, sir.
So 40,000.
Yeah.
Huh.
Well, we asked the question of the property appraisers from both Polk and Osceola County for the average taxable value, and we were given the number of $40,000. There's some questions that have been raised as to whether that includes vacant properties or not. I believe that it does not include the vacant properties. I believe when they did the property search on the tax database, they only asked it to search on the residential properties. To be specific, though, I have to be honest with you, we had to ask each of the property appraisers the answer to that question. But we were told that the average taxable value was $40,000. That was a number we were asked to get by the Florida League of Cities. They said that is a typical number that is used to compare the relative wealth and the relative taxable value amongst different Florida cities, so you can compare the tax base of the cities.
I would think, Mr. Chairman, I would think that, I mean, it's all public information, and if you knew what your boundaries were, you could, somebody could, I wouldn't say it'd be easy, but I don't know that it'd be hard. It wouldn't be complicated to look at what those values are, the sum total, and multiply that by some proposed millage rate and determine what the revenue would be. I mean, it wouldn't be a whole lot of guesswork involved in it, I wouldn't think.
That is correct. When we actually went through the numbers, what we actually got from the property appraisers, because the Osceola property appraisers database is a different database than the Polk County property appraiser database, but we got from the two property appraisers what their total taxable value was within the villages that we were including within the proposal. The number came out, and I believe we had it on one of the charts.
It was
no, okay, it's not on the chart, but it's in the feasibility study. Number came out to be almost $800 million is the total taxable value base for all of Poinciana that is proposed. And then what we did was we took that number and we looked at what we were proposing as the millage rate, which was 3.3 mils, and that came up with a number for the property tax number, which was the $2,397,785 worth of property tax that we included in our initial revenue calculations. Happy to answer any other questions about the other calculations that we made as we went through this. I have to say we relied extensively on the Florida League of Cities people in going through this. We're not the experts on it. They are. And they were the ones that took us through the whole thing and said Yes, these are the taxes that you're entitled to as a proposed city. This would be what your total amount of revenue would be expected to be, assuming that you use those taxes. Now, we talked about other taxes that are available to cities. You don't see a communication services tax up there, for example. We determined that on day number 1 of establishment of the new city, getting the city the revenue for that communication services tax would take some time and some paperwork to do. And so we did not include that in our initial budget estimate. Likewise, grants and fees. Typically, a city gets as much as 30% of its revenue from various types of grants. We did not include any grant revenue in the projections for the city of Poinciana, because in order to get grants, you have to have people in place who write up grant requests for the city, and that takes time. That takes a year, that takes 2 years from the time the city gets established until the time that those grants flow in. So we did not include any of that revenue in the initial projection because we were trying to be very conservative as far as what we said we were going to try to do. Likewise, for the proposed budget, we looked at the existing budget for the Association of Poinciana Villages. We established that as a benchmark. We said, okay, that's a known entity. That's what can deliver the services that we're talking about doing. And so we used that as the projected initial budget. Obviously, there's a significant number between the $11 million of the projected revenue, the $7 million of the budget. That we felt comfortable with that amount of additional revenue on day number 1 that we could use to fill in unknowns or undecided things as far as the initial revenue. And keep in mind, if you look at what the objective of this proposal is on day number 1 as a city to provide our residents the same level of services that they get today from the Association of Poinciana Villages. The intention being that once you establish the city, then it could be up to the residents of the city through their either elected representatives or through referendums on their own part to decide what additional services they would like and what they're willing to pay for. One of the key criteria that you hear when you talk to people from Poinciana is how much will this cost and how much can we afford? Well, the answer is you have to look what the proposal is for the city, figure out what your initial costs are, and then figure out what you'd like in addition to it. Would you like more law enforcement officers, for example, to come in? Would you like to spend more money on parks and recreation? Whatever you'd like. Leave that up to the elected representatives of the city to decide, rather than having the members on the charter committee or the members that were putting together the feasibility study make those initial decisions for them. So we tried to be very conservative as far as the numbers that we put into this feasibility study.
Senator Starkey.
I haven't spoken. There you go. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A couple slides back, you had the list of things that you're going to have retained with the county, sheriff, fire, yes, EMS, all those things. Wouldn't the city have to negotiate a contract for all of those services, and have you any idea what those would cost?
Yes and no. And I don't mean to be evasive at all. Certain of the services, such as the sheriff's department, for example, are paid for by county taxes that the residents of Poinciana pay for today and will continue to pay. Assuming that level of service is satisfactory to the residents of Poinciana, then there would be no additional costs involved. And we have that in writing from both Bob Hansel of Osceola County and from the Polk County Sheriff's Department. Fire EMS, for example, is paid for through special taxing districts. That would remain the same. Those taxes would not go away. Libraries, for example, are paid for in Polk County by an MSTU tax. That would remain the same. Parks and recreation that we get from the counties would still continue under an MSTU tax. Garbage and waste would continue under an MSTU tax. Other things such as planning, zoning, and whatnot, they might require a interlocal agreement to be signed between specific counties and the elected leaders of the city. Depending on the level of service that the city wanted, we'd either get that for what we currently pay in taxes, or if we wanted more, then that would be an additional fee that the city would pay to the county, and it would be negotiated as part of that interlocal agreement. One additional big item is the road maintenance. Poinciana is a very large community. We've got 79 square miles within Poinciana. That compares, for example, to the city of Kissimmee, which is 31. There's about 500 miles of roads total, I'm told, within Poinciana. Not all of those roads would end up being city-maintained roads. There would have to be an agreement reached between the new elected city leaders and each of the counties to decide which roads would remain as county roads, which roads would become city roads. And then based on the mileage that the city would be taking over from the county, then they would determine on an interlocal agreement between the two which revenues the county would get and which revenues the city would be responsible for maintaining. On the interim, because on day number one, the new city of Poinciana is not going to have a highway department. We don't have a highway department in the APV today. We have agreement from both of the counties that initially the city would have an interlocal agreement with each of the counties whereby the gas tax revenues that the city would be entitled to on day number one from the state would be sent over to the counties, just the way it is right now. The counties would continue for a period of time under the interlocal agreement to continue to maintain the roads for the city of Poinciana. Once the new established council is in place, then the council would sit down with the counties and they would come up with a new interlocal agreement that would be arbitrarily agreed to between both as to does the city want to take over maintenance of the local roads, or do they still want the county to do that in return for the city giving to the county the gas tax revenues that they get from the state.
Senator Soto, I'm going to follow up after you. But Senator Soto, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In your proposal, how many commissioners are you recommending?
Yes, good question. If you look at this map, and this was actually a map that was drawn up for us by the supervisors of elections, it breaks Poinciana down into 5 election districts, 2 on the Polk County side, 3 on the Osceola County side, which is very nice because it keeps the 2 supervisors of elections territories the same as what they are today. That is, Lori would still have the Polk County side, Mary Jane would still have the Osceola County side. What's interesting about this, and it's a significant advantage of the city proposal versus what we have in the HOA today, is each of the 5 election districts would be just about equal in terms of population. They would be equal as far as the number of voters, and we've actually made it equal as far as the demographics of it. They actually used the My District Builder tool, which I think you're familiar with as far as the new legislative redistricting that was done in 2010, to come up with the division of Poinciana into the 5 separate districts. Today, for example, we have 9 different villages within the HOA. One of the villages has only 28 owners in it, people living in it, but yet they have 1 director. We have other villages that have thousands of people, they have 1 director. So this is a much more fair way of running elections than what we have today under the Homeowners Association.
Follow up, Mr. Chair?
Follow up.
Would we be looking at a strong mayor or a strong city manager style city?
That would be a strong mayor with a city administrator.
And so would there be sorry, may I be recognized for a series? Thank you. Would that mayor run then citywide and be in addition to the 5 commissioners?
Yes, sir.
And just to keep it simple, if I was a city resident, or perhaps my cousins who live down there, what services, based upon your plan on the day-to-day, would they be expecting? And try to relate it to someone who's just living there today. What would they expect on your proposal? I see a lot of big things like community service and the parks and rec, but like if I was a resident sitting there, what could I expect from the city on day one?
Okay. On day number 1, you would get the same level of service from the city that you currently today get from the APV. You'd see the same level of service from the Parks and Recreation Department. You'd see the same level of service as far as community service, the same level of public works service, and the administration to support that. In fact, what the feasibility includes, and it would be required to be agreed to by the HOA, is that the feasibility study proposes that the HOA become a part of the new city. That is, that the APV remain intact as it is today, the only difference being that in order to abide by the Florida Constitution, that the board of directors of the APV would be replaced by the elected city leaders. The elected city leaders would then be compliant with the Constitution by having the city take control over the municipal services as required by the Constitution. But the services on day number one with the proposal in the feasibility study would be the same as what the residents see today. The people who currently work for the APV would still work for the APV. It would be a very smooth transition. As I said, once the elections take place and the city councils are seated, then it would be up to them to expand that if that was desired on the part of the city.
Last question, Mr. Chairman. Could we do this without requiring any change to the APV and let a city council make the determination as to what to do with APV? Like, for instance, in a bill, just allow the voters to vote on a city and not have to do anything either way and let a city council determine whether the APV terms remains intact or whether it goes away. Is that an alternative to what you're proposing?
I'm not a lawyer, but I believe that the situation is that there are two legal considerations here. One is that the Florida Constitution has to be abided by, and that is that the services need to be provided, municipal services and the municipal functions need to be provided by the city as called for in the Florida Constitution. So that's one point. The other point is that the APV, as I understand it, is a private corporation, and so the city does not have the power to arbitrarily disband the private corporation. I believe in other cases in the state where cities have been created, it has been a mutual agreement whereby the private corporation HOA has either come to agreement with the city as to I'll do this, you do that, and we live together on this type of thing, or else it has just worked itself out through a combination of litigation or whatnot. One alternative that may just happen here is, if the HOA doesn't provide any more services, the question becomes what happens to the HOA? Does it still continue to exist without providing any services, and can it in fact charge the residents for not providing anything but still continue to charge them? I think that's a legal issue that somehow is going to have to be worked out. But the one thing that it appears to be clear is the fact that the HOA is a private organization, and it has control over its own future as far as the board is concerned, and particularly in the case of this HOA, I mean, it's not the residents that control the board, it's the developer that controls the board, because they have the majority of the votes in a majority of the district. So it's really the developer that would have to make that decision as to what happens to the APV board. But the Constitution is clear that the services provided by the municipality are proprietary to the municipality, and it is the only one that can provide those services, at least as I understand it, and as has been explained to me by the lawyers that we've been working with.
I haven't read through your declarations as far as how the structure of your HOA and what some of the services are, but I would only assume with some of my previous work down in Poinciana that the HOA, the APV, also creates a consistency across the way the homes look, the way the design of the homes are, as far as the lawns and landscaping.
Such as a thing as I believe it's called the Design Control Board,
right.
Which involves the equivalent of zoning, coding, code enforcement, that type of thing. Precedent in Florida that I'm aware of In some cases, those functions have been turned over to the city, and the city takes over those responsibilities. In other situations, that has been left to the individual HOAs. Many times within a city, you have HOAs at the neighborhood level. In fact, within Poinciana, we have some HOAs at the neighborhood level. Lake Marion Resort, for example, is one. Tuscany Preserve is another. There's nothing in the feasibility study or the proposal that would change those. Those HOAs would remain in place. They would continue to deliver the things that they do. They don't deliver the public type services, however, that the APV does, which would, under the Constitution, revert over to the new city.
Who maintains the majority of the roads in Poinciana?
All of the roads in Poinciana are maintained by the two counties. That is a very sore subject with the counties. The roads in most of Poinciana were created using a material called sand cement. Sand cement tends not to last very long in the Florida conditions. And so, particularly in Polk County, because I'm very familiar with what they've done in Village 7 in Polk County, they've had to go in and they've had to scrape up a lot of the roads, the cement from the roads, and basically repave them in order to put down roads that meet typical Polk County standards. When I say it's a very sore subject with Polk County, they spend a lot of money, a lot of the county taxpayer monies, to redo those roads. Now, most of them have already been redone over the last several years, but that's an issue.
The right-of-way, however, the mowing of the right-of-way is conducted by the association.
That was going to lead to my next question is there any consideration in this feasibility study as far as additional cost for that road replacement under a city?
That other than the fact that we have agreement that the counties would assume road maintenance for the initial phase of the city, and then it would have to be worked out between the elected leaders of the city and the counties as far as how long that agreement would go on in place.
And part of what you said earlier was that the gas tax revenue would go towards that. Has there been any estimates as far as how much revenue would be collected from a gas tax? How much can be charged down there?
That number could be calculated based on the estimate of 500 miles for the total amount. I think each of the counties has their own number today of roads of how many miles of roads in Poinciana to get the money for, and then that revenue could be estimated. We had not estimated that because we already had the agreement from the counties that they would just agree to take the money that they're getting right now.
Okay. Representative Cumbie, and they had a question.
I guess with regard to
Sure.
gas tax, St. Cloud and Kissimmee already have a formula, and probably the same formula would apply with Poinciana if it became a city and was incorporated, I guess. I think the proper term for the road base was soil cement, and it was a kind of widely used, pretty much done away with over the years, decided it wasn't the best approach. But as an outsider looking in and not living in Poinciana, don't represent Poinciana, what if I'm a homeowner in there and say my assessed value, because I assume that we got an average, there's some that are up here and there's some that are below, so that's why we're winding up with a $40,000 average. Whether that includes the undeveloped lots or not, we don't know. But if I had a home that was assessed at $120,000, which I think would probably, there's got to be homes in there at $120,000.
Oh yeah, there are.
Yeah, it's certainly going to cost me more than that $40,000 average. There's going to be people that are paying more money, but without exception, notwithstanding HOA fees, but without exception, it costs more to live in a city in Polk County. We've got 17 municipalities, and it costs more to live there than it does in the unincorporated area.
Yes.
Because there's typically a higher level of service, especially with those that maintain their own libraries, although there is some cooperative funding for libraries, but those who maintain their own police departments in Polk County. I know you're aware a number of cities have decided to get out of the law enforcement business.
Dundee, for example.
And you are exactly right. The sheriff is the sheriff of Poinciana, the sheriff is the sheriff of Kissimmee and St. Cloud, and duly authorized and does patrol, I'm sure, those cities just as Sheriff Judd does in Lakeland. Now, obviously they probably don't place the same kind of emphasis on the cities because, or at least the ones that have their own force, because they have their own force. But nevertheless, they do provide law enforcement service in those cities and would continue to do so. Now, obviously, you can, contract for a higher level of service and greater police presence if you want to, and that does happen with some of our cities. But it costs more to live in a city.
Yes.
And I assume, and maybe there's the belief that if you can get out from under the APV or HOA fees, that it would basically be a wash, that it still costs you more to live, say, than somebody in the unincorporated area because of the fees that you pay to HOA or APV. So I don't know. I mean, when you all are trying to go this way, other people are trying to go the other way. And it's like, how's this going to work?
Can I address your concern about the cost on that? Because the cost is a very significant, and it's probably one of the most significant concerns that our residents have. And a key part of this proposal is the fact that we would be replacing many of the services, if not all of the services that are offered today by the APV with services provided by the city. Now, we need to look at, and that would be different than your typical unincorporated area, because typically in an unincorporated area, you don't have a master homeowners association like the APV that provides the level of mowing, cleaning up the sides of the roads, parks and recreation that the APV does, and whatnot. So by replacing the services that the APV has, you're looking at the fee that the APV pays today, which is $252 a year, being simply moved over to paying for the city tax. Now, what's $252 a year in terms of city millage rate, city tax, to the average homeowner at $40,000 taxable value? Well, if you do that calculation, what you find is that the average homeowner in Poinciana today with a $40,000 taxable value home is paying the equivalent of 6 mils of a city tax. Now, if you look around Polk County or you look around Osceola County, you'll find some cities that pay more than 6 mils. But in Osceola, for example, in the city of Kissimmee, they pay 4.85, I believe. I believe in St. Cloud they pay 4.9. So the average homeowner in Poinciana is already paying to the HOA a higher millage rate than what the homeowner in Kissimmee or St. Cloud are. And look what they're getting for their city tax. They've got a police department. They've got a fire department. They're getting their own library system. They're getting parks they're getting refuse pickup. Those are things that the Poinciana residents today pay over and above the HOA fees. So what we've done, and here again, we're not clairvoyant on this whole thing. We've worked extensively with the representatives from the Florida League of Cities, is we've looked at this and we've tried to compare. At the 3 mil rate that we're proposing here, how does that compare with a 4.85 rate in Kissimmee, for example? Because keep in mind, the new city of Poinciana would not have costs for public safety, would not have costs for a police department, would not have costs for a fire department. And those costs from every city that you have in either of the two counties can range as much as 40 to 50% of the city budget. So if you do the math very quickly, you look at what the residents of the other cities are paying versus what we're talking about from Poinciana, and yeah, 3.3 mil looks like a reasonable figure when you take the police and fire out of what the other cities are paying for. And when you compare that to what they're paying today to the HOA and only getting the functions and the services provided by the HOA, it starts to look like a pretty good deal. Now, what we've offered to do, and we've done this with a couple of individuals, is if they identify themselves to us, we'll go into the appropriate county tax base, look at what their taxable value is, and tell them what their proposed city taxes were. One individual that we looked at, his taxable value actually was $7,000 on a home that was actually appraised up in the $60,000 range. Now, how did he get there? Well, the way he got there was a couple years ago, Florida had a tax deal whereby you could carry part of your tax savings along with you. I know I took advantage of it when I moved from South Florida up to Poinciana several years ago. He took advantage of that. I don't know where he moved from or whatnot, but he was able to knock that down. He was also able to knock down his appraised value because he claimed the homestead exemption.
Let me stop you just a minute. Let me say that's not good for the future of the city of Poinciana. Just so you know, when you start using those figures, that isn't good news. That these folks don't pay much, because ideally you're trying to generate revenue to provide services, and if you're basing this on assessed value, it's like this is a two-edged sword. It's going to cut both ways on us here. And I don't want to disparage or demean the League of Cities. I saw Kathy Till here earlier. I don't know if she's still here, and I won't say they have a conflict of interest, but why did you all pick the League of Cities to do the feasibility study? Or
we did what we did with the feasibility study was we took the base feasibility study that was done 4 years ago by the University of Central Florida the first time around. We worked with them. We then cross-checked our work from them with the Florida League of Cities so that we had multiple opinions coming to us. And then what we did was we adapted that to what our objectives were as far as the feasibility study. We also had the good fortune of working with a law firm located in Orlando that we used as cross-checking on that as well.
Well, I've been around long enough to know that you really need commercial and industrial concerns that are operating and paying taxes to help keep the ship upright. When all you have is residential folks that are paying taxes, when you have the kind of exemptions that you mentioned a minute ago that the fellow that came up from down south have, pretty soon it's like, how are we going to make ends meet? When you start talking about having employees, you talk about salary plus benefits. Then you start talking about employees to work on weekends. So not only do you need 5, but you got to have 9 because you got to have days off and vacation. And pretty soon it's like, wow, I'm an old romantic type myself. There's times when I've wished for something really, really bad and I got it. And then I was like, what the heck was I thinking?
Well, and if I can just share with you, we've worked extensively with several real estate companies, both in the Poinciana area and in the Osceola County area. And at this point in time, the real estate situation in Poinciana has changed considerably in the last 3 years. The number of vacancies, the number of foreclosures have gone down substantially. In fact, there is significant new investment in Poinciana. I live within Solavita. There are hundreds of houses that are being built within Solavita. There was just announced by Avatar this past week in the Business Journal another 520 some houses development being built along Poinciana Boulevard. There's rumor, and we get a lot of rumors because we don't have an open municipal government in Poinciana, that there's 700 lots that are going to be purchased down in Village 7 on the Polk County side by a Canadian investment company. We're getting a warm feeling about the real estate future for Poinciana. The other thing I can share with you about Poinciana, and I know a number of you are involved in this as far as the Poinciana Parkway and the Osceola Expressway Authority, is that if you look at the Orlando Metro Plan 2030 plan that the Expressway Authority has booked for Poinciana, the Poinciana Parkway is just the small first stage of that plan. The PD&E studies are already underway to connect the northern part of that parkway directly to I-4 and to connect Poinciana Village Center directly to the Florida Turnpike. Those would be 65-mile-an-hour toll roads that would make the commuting distance between Poinciana and I-4 about 15 to 20 minutes, the commuting distance between Poinciana and the Florida Turnpike about 20 minutes, versus what today is an hour to get simply from Poinciana to Kissimmee along Pleasant Hill Road. So when you talk about opening up Poinciana from a transportation standpoint, you're talking about a brand new ballgame as far as the opportunity for commercial investment to come into Poinciana, for businesses. I mean, my personal feeling, you're not ever going to change Poinciana from being a bedroom community. That's what we are. That's our strength, and that's what we were meant to be. We will become a stronger bedroom community as we get better transportation and more bedrooms. As you become a stronger bedroom community, you'll get more commercial coming into the community. So I think the future for Poinciana is very, very good. But here again, the objective of this is to let the elected government of the new city decide what Poinciana can afford and what Poinciana can't afford. We're not empowered to do that. Anything we put into the feasibility study has no meaning anyway, because it's only the elected leaders of the new city that can make those kind of decisions. So what we tried to do was to take a very conservative approach, start with a minimum level of services, that which are currently offered by the APV, hopefully to make our members of the legislative delegation feel like we've done our homework, that we've got a reasonable proposal here that we can move forward. And then, assuming that this goes before the electorate, and the electorate assuming that they vote on it, then let the people decide in Poinciana what the future of Poinciana should be, as opposed to what we're fixed with today, which quite frankly is, and I think you've seen some samples of it, is something that's being dictated by some private special interest groups within Poinciana that are making decisions not necessarily based on what the people want, but are what's on the best interest of the special interest groups.
What is the motivation behind becoming a city on the financial terms? You've been talking about taxes and HOA fees and the cost. It sounds like from your presentations going down, from some of the things Representative Cumbie has mentioned, we don't really have a grasp on what some of those taxes are. What is the financial motivation behind this feasibility study?
The financial motivation? Other than the fact that, it looks like we would be more equitable as far as how we treat our residents, in that the residents that would qualify for homestead exemptions would end up paying less than the residents who are snowbirds that only come to Poinciana for a couple months of the year, where today they each pay the same amount. It would be more equitable from the standpoint that people would be paying taxes based on the assessed values of their properties. Today, for example, under the HOA, Walmart, and I'm not sure exactly what their number is, but I believe that they just pay $252 a year, which is the same amount that a homeowner does. Now, come on, Walmart is a much more valuable piece of property in Poinciana than his house or some of the other houses in Poinciana, but yet today they pay the same amount. I think that, the intent of the laws of the state of Florida are, from a tax-based standpoint, to reward the homesteaders, to provide tax breaks to the veterans, to provide tax breaks to the senior citizens, and that would be carried over to a new city of Poinciana, where that does not exist today within Poinciana. Within Poinciana, everybody pays the same $250, with one exception. And that one exception happens to be the developer who owns most of the lots and controls most of the votes. And he doesn't pay a thing, because that was agreed to in a 1985 amendment to the original Homeowners Association thing that allowed him to get by without ever paying any more HOA fees to the city, or to the HOA. Now, personally, I find it offensive, the fact that the residents have to pay a full vote in order to maintain the city, while the developer is not paying anything.
Good.
Representative Cumbie, yes.
Just kind of follow up on that.
Sure.
But the developer pays property tax to Osceola County or Polk County on those, and then in turn those taxes provide EMS and fire and law enforcement.
No, the EMS the EMS in both, I believe, Polk and Osceola counties are paid for by a special non-ad valorem tax that the individual homeowners pay.
EMS and are you going to tell me that the Sheriff's Department, law enforcement, is not provided funding through the general fund and through property taxes?
No, Grady's funds and Bob Hansel's funds do come out of the general revenue funds.
Yeah.
And you're right.
You're saying EMS is 100% enterprise in Osceola and Polk? There's
Yeah.
no
That's my understanding. Yes. Mm-hmm. Same with the garbage collection and those types of things.
Right,
Yeah.
that is true.
MSTUs for the libraries, MSTUs for the parks and recreation and whatnot. And I'll grant you that the developer does pay for that. But the fact that the individual residents have to pay $252 a year to pay for getting the grass cut on the rights of way that lead to the developer's developments, while the developer pays nothing, but yet benefits by the fact that the rights of way are squeaky clean and well maintained. I find that to be a little bit unfair because he benefits from that as well as do the residents. Yeah.
Well, just one more though. The county maintains the roads, but they do not maintain any of the right-of-way.
No, what happens is, as an unincorporated area, the county has certain standards that they offer to unincorporated areas. I believe it's that they will mow the lawns along the right-of-way one time a month. So it's like 12 cuts a year.
Right.
My understanding is that the HOA in Poinciana has an agreement with the counties whereby the HOA mows as many times a year as they choose to desire. The county in turn gives them funding for the times the county would normally pay for that the APV in fact does. So if you look at the roads within Poinciana today, the roads are immaculate along the main drives. You go along Cypress Parkway, for example, and you'll find that it's immaculate.
So the answer to the question is the county would maintain them, but they never get the opportunity because y'all have got it under control.
That's true. And what we would be picking up as the new city, and again, an interlocal agreement we need to finalize this, is we would continue to maintain the roads the same way that
I'm sure that doesn't make the county mad at all that you all have got that taken care of.
That's not one
it
of the
doesn't
things.
make them mad. They're happy not to do it.
And I will tell you that when we went to Bartow, when we met with Michael Craig and we met with the Polk County people, and we talked about the possibility of us becoming a city, there were a couple of items, and I won't tell you which ones, he almost gave us a kiss on.
Oh, really?
Because he said, I'd love to get rid of these.
You got to watch him. He'll give you a
I know.
kiss. Val, did you work for the
Yes, I
HOA or the APV?
Yes, sir.
I knew that face was familiar.
22 years.
Representative Rangel, no problem.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I had a question. One of the things I kept hearing also was that there's no representation, I guess. Can you give me an idea or give us an idea of, of the board and say, how many residents are actually out there and, so on and so forth?
We have, on the APV board, there are 9 directors. The 9 directors are the decision-making power for Poinciana. Of those 9 directors, we have one from Village 9. She happens to be the president of the APV board at this point in time. Village 9 is not part of the proposed area that we're representing.
Village 1 is the resident.
Well, and yeah, we can go through here. Village 9 actually is well up to the north of that. It consists of about 250 houses, about 500 residents. I think there's about 20 kids under age 18 up there. The rest of them are retirees. They get 1 seat on the board. She has to be the president. Villages 1 and Villages 2 have seats on the board. They today are the people sitting in those seats are actual residents of Village 1 and Village 2. Village 3 has a representative on the board. He is also a resident of Village 3. Village 7 has a representative on the board who happens to live in Solavita. He's a property owner who owns property in Village 7. Village 8, which consists of only 28 residents, has a representative on the board, and that is an Avatar employee. Village 4, who has no residents but still has a seat on the board, is an Avatar employee. Village
They claim 1 lot. 1 lot.
Village 6.
They own 1 lot? I'm sorry?
They claim 1 lot as ownership, but they sit 1 person.
Village 6 has 1 director on the board. Also, no one lives there. Avatar owns that directorship. So if you look at the current makeup of the board, you have 3 Avatar directors, you have 1 director who actually lives in Solovita, and you have a 5th director who lives in the small community up to the north. So there's really only 4 members of the board that are residents of the actual Poinciana villages themselves. What's also of significance, if you understand how the board works, is there's a 3-person executive committee that really is the decision-making power on the board. My understanding is that was created back when the hurricanes came through before my time, so that they could make some very quick decisions. Currently, my understanding is that the 3 persons on that executive committee are the director from Village 7, who happens to be the Solovita resident, a representative from Avatar, and the representative from Village 3. So there are, you know, of the 3 members on the executive committee, only 1 actually lives within the villages of Poinciana.
Thank you.
And this executive committee has the power to make any decision that affects the entire board.
And you can't find out what goes on in their meetings because they don't publish the minutes of the meetings. In fact, and that's another issue is this whole budget situation. You can't get a copy of their budgets without filing a legal records request. And in fact, we have a person here today that they just used the new law that was passed this year in order to finally get access to some of the ledgers of it. You can't get access to the minutes of the meetings because they never publish them. They never, unlike even the Osceola Expressway Authority meetings, which they have up here, which are televised and you can get the minutes of the meetings, you can't find, unless you go to the meetings, you can't find out what's going on. And when it comes time to elect the board members, there is no such thing as an absentee ballot. You must show up on the day of the election between the hours of noon and 6:30, which for anybody who works in Poinciana, you can't do that, not without taking time off from work. And when you do show up for the election to cast your ballot, you get to cast your ballot, but then the homeowner, then the developer, if they own a large number of properties within that community, gets to cast all of their ballots for anybody that they want. And we can show you the example of a recent election down in Village 7 where my son happened to run. He got like 3 or 4 people votes. Another gentleman who's in the room ran, he got 14 votes. I mean, keep in mind, this is an election held in the middle of the day, but yet the persons who won got 1,500 votes from Avatar. Now, I mean,
And that's how it's controlled.
that's how you win.
beats 14.
I mean, you know, the term has been used that the directors on the APV board of directors are bobbleheads. That they don't get there unless Avatar puts them there.
Well, let me ask another question. You got your answer? Through this feasibility process, has there been any other considerations as far as other maybe options other than incorporation?
Excellent question. Excellent question. Back in 2009, when we had the big fatouche in Poinciana about incorporation, and at that point in time, the boundaries were much more expanded than what we have today. There was a big fight. And the people from Solovita said, no, we don't want it. And the people on Pleasant Hill said, no, we don't want it. And as a result of that, it was suggested very strongly that we all ought to look at alternatives in order to do that. We have done that very, very diligently since then. Some of the alternatives that we looked at were taxing districts, CFOs, MSTUs, and whatnot. In each case where we got involved in discussions with the counties as far as the taxing districts, they did not succeed. A variety of excuses were used, such as, well, if it's an MSTU type tax, it'll count against the 10 mil cap for the county.
I don't mean to interrupt you, but
Sure.
Did you say that it was done in the 2009 study?
It was done after the 2009. It was done over the years between 2009 and now.
But it's not a part of this feasibility?
No, other than to say that we've looked at that in the past, and that's what forced us into what we're doing right now. I mean, quite frankly, the only way that we've accomplished some of the things that we've accomplished in Poinciana, and I've heard a lot about that in the session today, and I can talk to you about them. I mean, we got the hospital, we got the Village 7 Sports Park, we got the community park down in Village 7. We've made a lot of progress as far as the Poinciana Parkway, and I can tell you the stories about how that happened, because until Senator Paula Dockery came to Poinciana in October of 2011, that was a private project. That was owned by Avatar. When we looked at the FDOTs, when Paula looked at the FDOTs and said, what about this project? They knew nothing about it, because it didn't appear on any official government radar list. It was a private project that had been promised to the people of Poinciana for over 20 years and never delivered on. Well, what happened was, through the help of Senator Dockery, and bless her heart, we ended up shortly after that having the Poinciana Parkway working group put together, which was made up of elected officials from Osceola and Polk County. They ended up bringing in the Osceola Expressway Authority, and the rest is history as far as what happened as far as the Poinciana Parkway. Atlee Mercer, the chairman of the Expressway Authority, tells us that he expects to be clearing grub and starting to move things shortly after the first of the year. And I know that a number of you people have been involved in that, and we thank you very much, because that did not happen without a whole lot of help from the state legislative delegation.
Most of the projects that you have seen moving forward, such as the hospital, parks, etc., are actually driven by residents that get involved in trying to push these projects forward. It ends up benefiting the developer, but hey, he's the landowner, so that's the way it goes. But the hospital was driven by a lot of the residents, friends of Poinciana Hospital. The parks in Village 5, you will hear somebody speak about that. It is always resident-driven. In most cases, the developer as well as the HOA are missing in action.
So it's safe for me to say then that because the folks are passionate in Poinciana, things are happening. I mean, those items you just mentioned are happening.
And I don't think there's any question about that. I mean, we have a very good track record of things that have been happening in Poinciana. But I think if you talk to the members of the members of the county commissions, and if you talk to the people on the Expressway Authority and whatnot, the reason why that has happened is because there's been very strong involvement on the part of people in the community that have done that. And I can tell you personally, because I've been one of those people, I know that Annette Brown will say the same thing. We're tired. We don't get paid a nickel for driving between Bartow, or between Poinciana and Bartow. Nobody's compensating us for our time. We are pure volunteers. In a situation where we had an elected municipal government, we would be having people from our elected municipal government attending these meetings. And by the way, they would have a lot more clout at these meetings than what we would have. For example, if you're familiar with the Polk TPO, which is the Transportation Planning Organization, each of the 17 cities within Polk County gets a member on that, or a representative on that Transportation Planning Committee. Poinciana gets nobody. We have to lobby at the county commission meetings by making our voices heard. And fortunately, we have some supporters in the press to make our demands known as well. So we've had some success as far as getting some things going on. But it's been driven by the people in the community.
Let me say, not every city has a representative on the TPO. Some, like the city of Lakeland, have 3 seats or 4 seats, where Winter Haven will have 2, Bartow may have 2, Haines City may have 2, and I don't know what the makeup is of it now, but there are some cities that do not have representation on the Polk TPO.
Don't they have like a consortium of a number of the cities, and they get a floating member or something like that? I could be wrong.
May have since I've
You're
been
probably more
right.
familiar.
Yeah, and I don't know. I mean, it changes from time to time, but not everybody had a seat at the table. Whereas Lakeland may have had 3 seats. In fact, I think they had 3. And
well, that's a perfect example, because let's talk about.
Yeah, if you were a city, you may have 2.
Well, and that's a perfect example. I mean, Polk County, Lakeland has got about 100,000 people in it. Polk, Osceola, or Poinciana, across the 2 counties, has got about 50,000 people in the area that we're talking about here. Winter Haven has got 33,000 people. Bartow's got 30,000 people. They all get to sit at the table, and Poinciana gets nothing. Except for the fact that we get in our cars and we drive to the county commission meetings and we make our voices heard.
I think that membership was determined not only by population, but also as being a part of the Lakeland Winter Haven MSA. So if you were outside of that, Frostproof, some of those other places, it wouldn't matter. You wouldn't participate because you wouldn't be a part of the MSA. But I'm not, things change.
Well, and I was just using that as an example. I mean, one of the things that we're hoping to see, and Tom Deardorff was at the meeting I attended, which was the kickoff for the PD&E for the connection to I-4, is Polk County is now considering extending Sunrail. And if you look, I mean, there was some talk this morning about transportation in Poinciana and the Sunrail stop. If they could extend Sunrail for another 5 miles, that would, over the existing CSX tracks, that would stop in front of the Lowman Post Office, which crosses Ronald Reagan Boulevard, which is where the Poinciana Parkway will terminate with Phase 1, which means that the 47,000 people in this map of Poinciana could quickly go less than 10 minutes up and get on that Sunrail train to get to downtown Orlando. That would be a very, very big deal. Much more of a big deal than today what they would have to do to get over to the Sunrail stop, which is over on 1792.
Okay. Any more questions, gentlemen? Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.